Do you remember when running a dungeon in WoW actually felt like a whole process? Like you didn't just click a button and appear inside. You had to find somebody, you had to find people, you had to ask in chat, you had to run there. And once you were in, you were kind of stuck with the group you had. You were fully committed. For me, that dungeon was definitely Deadmines. I ran Deadmines on basically every Alliance character I ever made, and I don't even think I had one crazy story from it. I just remember doing it over and over again because I loved it so much. Running through Westfall, getting into the mines, trying to make it to the ship, someone pulling too much, someone not knowing where to go. Deadmines was so vast, and it was your first like your first true experience of a dungeon for the Alliance. And there was such good loot from that dungeon as well. And I think that's what made those old dungeons stick with me, specifically Deadmines, because that's where I got my first blue weapon. You had that awesome staff from there and that great, I think, dagger or sword. It wasn't just that Deadmines had cool loot, even though it did. It was that you had to actually go through it with people. And sometimes the group was a hot mess, but you still pushed through. And by the end, those random people didn't always feel random anymore. And to move on from that, I think Deadmines works so well because it wasn't just some random dungeon. Westfall was already building up the whole Defias thing. I mean, all the quest line, the area had Defias Brotherhood everywhere. You're out there killing them, running around farms, doing all those quests. And eventually the game is like, all right, now go to the mines and complete Deadmines. Take out the main leader of this brotherhood. And as a kid, that felt awesome. You know, you're doing all these quests through Westfall and you're kind of leading up to it. And then you go to Deadmines and you finally clear it and you take out the main Defias leader of the gang and you get his sweet loot. Deadmines had everything. A bunch of bosses, loot people actually wanted, Mr. Smite being a pain in the ass, that master ship, and Van Cleef. And getting to the end actually felt good because it wasn't always guaranteed, honestly. Sometimes the group was smooth. Sometimes it was a complete disaster. Someone pulled too much, you got lost. It was so many things that can go wrong. But if you stuck it out and finished, it felt like you actually did something. And I think that's what made those old dungeons memorable. They weren't just quick runs. They weren't those messy little adventures you did. And I think every old WoW player has a dungeon like that in mind. Maybe it wasn't Deadmines, maybe it's Wailing Caverns, maybe it's Gnomeregan, maybe it's Scarlet Monastery. But there's probably one dungeon you ran away too many times, struggled through, chased gear in, and somehow still remember it 20 years later. And I personally think part of the reason those dungeons stuck with us is because back then, during the old WoW, the game wasn't completely solved. Right now, the game is fully solved, right? You could look things up back then. Add-ons existed, right? But it wasn't like it is now, where every route, every pull, every single detail of a dungeon is already mapped out and explained entirely. I never forget back then, you know, if I found a good DPS or a good tank or a good healer, I would add them to my friends list and I would actually hit them up all the time like, hey, do you want to join this group? And they would do it to me as well. And I feel like back then you kind of had like a reputation with your name. I know now you kind of do maybe, but like back on old World of Warcraft, you had a server reputation, you know, and people would hit you up and use you for more dungeons. And I think that was one of the key pieces to old WoW, is it felt more alive in a more socially aspect than it does now. People want in, they want the loot, they want the experience, and they want out kind of now. And I get it, I do too. But back then, because everything took longer, you actually had time to talk to people. You had time to struggle. You had time to remember the run. And I think that's what made it feel more real to me. And don't get it twisted, I'm not saying every dungeon was like some magical, you know, earth-shattering experience. A lot of times they were not. Sometimes the groups disappeared and it just fell apart. A lot of them were annoying. Some groups were just absolutely terrible like they are now. Sometimes you gotta spend more time finding the group than actually doing the dungeon. But that's probably why I remember those moments from old WoW, you know, back in Deadmines, and just taking your time with it and exploring the dungeon with your group. You had to actually commit to the run. And when you finally finished the dungeon, it felt like you went through something with those people. As silly as that sounds, man. I know it sounds so ridiculous. And for me, Deadmines is always going to be that dungeon. Not because it was the hardest dungeon in the game, you know, it's the first, you know, you're the first real Alliance dungeon, but because it was one of those first times WoW felt bigger than just leveling. I mean, it opened up a whole new, you know, you're going through WoW, Element Forest, Westfall, you're questing, and then you finally get to do a dungeon, and that really opens up the game in a whole new aspect. You're like, okay, wow, there are these things called dungeons and I can get sick loot and experience. This is a whole new experience for me. It felt like a whole adventure. And I think every old WoW player has a dungeon like that in their mind somewhere from their memories. A dungeon you ran into many times, a dungeon where you wanted that one item or in the mount or something from the dungeon. So I'm curious, what was your dungeon? Was it Deadmines, Wailing Caverns, Scarlet Monastery, Shadowfang Keep? What was that one dungeon you still remember? Drop it in the comments below because I really want to hear from you guys what you think and what your dungeon was back then.